Welcome everybody to our MOE Digital Academy on Essential Parenting Coaching with James Wright. James is, among other things, a family coach, a published author, and a great supporter of MOE and a MOE trainer. James is going to deliver the presentation for about 45 minutes, and then we're going to be followed by a Q&A.
Well, look, thanks, Jane, and thanks, everybody. Thanks so much for taking time out tonight to listen to the talk. And it's one of many that the MOE Digital Academy has produced, which has been organized by the MOE Foundation. For those of you who don't know MOE, and I can see a few people that I know on the call from other places who may not know about MOE. MOE stands for Me, Others, and Everyone, MOE. And it's a charity founded on the core belief that by empowering our own lives, which is the me part, we can positively impact the lives of the people around us, the others, and collectively, everyone, we can make a difference in the world. So if you'd like to find out more about MOE Foundation, look up mofoundation.com. I've prepared a talk for about 45 minutes or so, and then we've got lots of time for questions and discussion if you're able to stay. And if you are happy for us to be recording the talk and the QA session that follows, that's great. If anyone would prefer not to be identified in that recording, we probably won't make available the Q&A, but if there are any bits and pieces in the Q&A where you would prefer that what you've just said doesn't go to a wider audience, just let us know in the chat and we can easily edit bits and pieces out. But we're not looking for any sort of coaching or people exposing certain parts of their lives or families or habits or anything tonight. It's not a coaching session. And if anyone likes to learn by reading, we can also send copies of my book, Pro Quo, and the publisher is happy to send them. The price is $12.99 if you like one. That includes the postage, and 40% of that is going to go directly to the MOE Foundation. They'll also be on sale at the MOE conference if any of you are going along to that in Gresham Street in October. So if you'd like one, just put your name and address, name and email address in the chat during the talk, or you can write to Jane directly at jane@mofoundation.com. I'll give you those details at the end of the talk, just to remind you. So look, I've put here the title of the talk, Children Expect Us to Expect Them to Excel. And I'm starting this talk with this statement because I don't want there to be any thoughts in our heads that our children are going to settle for mediocre. And I'm pushing this idea of being fully present and attentive with our children in order that they recognize that we recognize their excellence. Okay. So that said, I put here coaching conversations are not normal conversations. Let's be clear about this right up front. Don't be under any illusion that a coaching conversation is normal in the same sense that two friends chat over coffee is normal, or in the same sense that we banter with a shopkeeper or play board games together or talk about the weather. Because coaching conversations, as many of us on the call, I can see a lot of you are already coaches. Coaching conversations have just one aim in mind, and that's to move people's thinking. That's my definition of coaching, move people's thinking. If their thinking moves a little bit, or indeed a big bit, the coaching has been useful. So just to be clear, coaching is not mentoring. Mentoring is guiding and instructing and telling and sharing one's experiences from a place of relevant knowledge. And parents do a bit too much of this, and a big part of this talk is going to be aiming at doing less mentoring. And nor is coaching the same as parenting. Parenting is loving and educating and protecting and suffering, perhaps. So coaching assumes a position of no relevant knowledge. We don't need to know anything. No experience of what the child wants to discuss with us. And a lot of detachment. And we'll come to the detachment bit a bit later. Coaching simply encourages coachees, and in this case our children, to explore and move their own thinking. So if coaching may not be normal, it is structured. On this slide are some of the key things a parent coach needs to consider in their coaching sessions, and each one of these takes practice. It can take a bit of time to identify and introduce these aspects into our coaching conversations, but when we've practiced them, we can quickly discover the benefits in the thinking and learning environments we're creating with our children. Structuring conversations in this way says to the child, you matter. Your thinking matters. So let me just tell you a couple of other things that are not going to happen tonight. I'm not going to talk to you about how to parent your children. No one is better placed to know your children than you. And I'm not going to tell you how to solve any problems that your children present to you. Coaching is not about giving advice or indeed too much help either. And I'm going to make a distinction between being helpful and being useful a bit later. And there isn't time tonight to workshop or demonstrate any of the coaching aspects from this slide with you. This is going to be more a presentation tonight than a practical. And we can perhaps get into a little more detail with some of these aspects in the Q&A session at the end, if indeed you can stay. But the good news is that we can all, every one of us, become a really effective parent coach just by building and adopting the correct supportive mindset. And that can be achieved in just seconds. We'll be talking about that a little bit more later. So this next slide is a little contentious and can seem counterintuitive. I call it my coaching IOU. And the point here is to try not to appear too interested in what your child is talking about. Try not to be helpful. And by that, I mean, let's make a distinction between being helpful and being useful. I define being helpful as being fully involved, offering help and advice, giving our opinion because we think the child probably won't get there by itself or not as quickly as we'd like it to. So I'm recommending that we try instead to get to a point where we are being useful to the child's thinking. And this means not injecting your own thoughts and opinions too soon. You might be able to inject them later, but mostly it means getting out of the way of the child's thinking. And probably the most difficult thing for parents to understand from this talk is going to be your ability to detach from your child's thinking and ideas and actions. And why is that important? Well, let me invite you to think of the many ways we manipulate our children's thinking when we insert our own filters. Think of the many ways we corrupt and pollute their thinking by overlaying our own. And yes, I'm using words like corrupt and pollute. These are strong words. I think if we can remove our need to overly attach or to be important or to be right or better and get that need out of the way, our children will show us exactly where they want their thinking to go, and they will surprise us. So maybe we should call it healthy detachment. Healthy detachment is as difficult, I'd say, for parents to achieve as it is beneficial to the child's thinking and ownership of its choices and decision making. And the moment we reveal our inclinations to override our children's thinking, they just learn to shut down around us. A coaching friend of mine, Liz McCann, who set up the coaching provision at the BBC some years ago, has a lovely definition of coaching, which is listening with riveted detachment. Let's be really present, really engaged, and at the same time, get out of the way. I've created a much less prosaic reminder for coaching parents. Look, allow your child to know stuff, with the emphasis on allow. If we can build trust with them by delighting in their thinking processes, whatever the results, right or wrong, we'll soon find out that they will create some fabulous ideas that they will be motivated to build on. And on that subject, let's have a look at being right and being wrong, because in many cases, who really cares? My feeling is that there's so much factual and logical knowledge that is often just used as one-upmanship these days. If you know those people who know every answer in pub quizzes. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. It's a bit of fun. But this need to know more than you often pervades into our thinking as parents. I'm older than you, so I know more than you. You should listen to me. I'm wiser than you. I've been there before. But if you need to know pretty much anything, any facts, it's pretty easy to find it out in a few seconds on Google. Okay. So I thought I'd break this talk into 5 fairly short sections. Here they are. And let's start with potential and by looking at filters. We all look at life through unique filters, and our personal filters may be cultural, financial, I don't know, emotional, violent, humorous, inclusivist, exclusivist, and so on and so on. And two similar people can and regularly do look at exactly the same event and interpret it in different ways. Have you ever stopped, for example, to consider how you look at your children when you talk to them? What filter are you creating through which to view them? What do you see and who do we see? What intentions are we subconsciously delivering as we talk with them? And how many times might we catch ourselves daily relating to our children through a filter of, this is going to be a problem, or maybe you are the problem, or indeed the opposite. You're awesome. You'll work it out. You don't need me. You're so resourceful. And things like that. So let me offer you one of my tenuous acronyms that you might find useful. As coaches, we only ever regard the person in front of us as a totally outstanding person capable of astonishing things. You're a top cat. I'm a top cat. Our children are all top cats. And coaches and parents with their coaching hats on cannot and must not see anything other than that infinite potential. Because why would we? Why would anyone? We all grow in confidence from not being contradicted and from being really heard. And I think we grow in confidence from having our wishes respected and from not being railroaded. I heard that some years ago it was surmised that the vast majority of jobs that our children will eventually hold haven't even been invented yet. Our children have got unknowable opportunities awaiting them. And it's likely that we, as the parents, will be the people that lead them to their eventual place of brilliance. Or is it really? Who here's got a job that they'd never heard of when they were at school? Anybody? Just give me a little show of hands. So how can we, in all conscience, step into our children's life and tell them what it is we are preparing them for in several years' time or several decades' time? Good coaching is, therefore, I think, a mindset. It's more an attitude than it is a set of skills. And we can't teach attitude to children. We can only model it and wait until our children choose an attitude that works for them. And then they can model it for themselves. And this is where patience comes in. It's like trying on clothes. Most of us try on clothes to create dozens of different fashion styles in any one lifetime before we settle on the look that we feel most comfortable with. It's the same with attitudes. So here's a reframe that parents might find really useful. If your daughter is rude to you or to other people, she isn't a rude girl. That's not her fixed identity. She is simply trying on an attitude of rudeness, temporarily, to see how the world responds to her while she's wearing it. Your son isn't an antisocial boy. He's just choosing to experience your reactions to him when he chooses to ignore you. Okay, so the more you show your children that you believe in them as top cats, the less you end up worrying about the choices they make. And I put heavy emphasis on this mindset. In fact, the entire first half of my book looks at building a supportive mindset so that the ground is properly prepared for coaching to be introduced. And then the second half explores how to acquire and practice the skills. And I think if we don't invest in our emotional intelligence as parents, coaching, that is pure, useful coaching, can never actually take place. So here we move into the second chapter. I put here, never ask a child why and never tell a child don't. Whether we say don't or whether we say do, in fact, to our children, either way, we might be shutting down their thinking. And if we do it too often, it becomes tedious and somehow demeaning for them. But asking why they did or didn't do something just puts them on the defensive. And all their energy goes towards explanation instead of exploration, justification instead of innovation. So here's my D-Day coaching challenge for you. Could you go a whole mealtime or afternoon or evening or day without saying either D word, don't or do, to your children? And instead, replace them with open questions like, what are your thoughts about that? How could you sort it out so you're happy with it? Where could you find the information you'd need? And so on. If you haven't come across Nancy Klein's work, she's one of my favorite coaching gurus, and there's a lovely quote from her book, Time to Think, that you may have seen. Just ask your children this question before you start jumping in with quick solutions. How far can your mind go before it has need of mine? In other words, what can your mind come up with before I decide to do your thinking for you? And we'll soon learn that their brains work just every bit as well as ours. Now, this next slide, I've put here 3 words: ask, listen, tell. I'm going to suggest that coaches would probably talk around 10 to 20% of the duration of most of their coaching interactions, with 95% of that being in question form. And when I say questions, I mean questions to which parents and teachers take note, questions to which we do not already have a prepared answer that we're trying to lead the child towards. I mean open questions. Parents, however, we probably talk for around 60 to 80% of any interaction with a child. I've got no specific scientific proof of that. I look in the mirror and I think that's probably true of me on a number of occasions. So my observations reveal most of our talking is comprised of giving direction and advice. And if we do use questions, they tend to be judgmental or leading the child to a course of action, or it's designed to be protective. So as you can see on the slide, I'm going to recommend, first of all, ask first, listen second, and tell if you have to third. And I've created 3 little maxims here that have served me well. The first one is ask 10 times more than tell. Make it a household rule to ask questions of our children at least 5 times more than we tell them what we think. And I'm putting here 10 times is even better. This requires a lot of stamina, a lot of concentration to consciously stay away from too much telling. Catch yourself telling, stop it, and go back and ask a question. And say that in front of the child. And the child will quickly learn that they don't need to think around us if we habitually override their thinking and their ideas. Praise 10 times more than criticize. It's been estimated that most of us hear around 8 times more criticism than praise. And so here's our chance to redress that balance. Let's find appreciative things to say as often as possible. Some parents believe it is in fact normal for youngsters, particularly teenagers perhaps, to be sullen and unimaginative and gruff and rude. And I don't subscribe to this. And this, in my opinion, does not need to be normal. I believe if we were to infuse consistent, authentic praise into our everyday dialogue with our children, they'll come to expect that and see that as normal. And then they will do that with their kids when that time comes. Normality is what we make it. And here's a thought for education, perhaps. What if we were to introduce a couple of new high school exams? How would a GCSE in coaching or respectful communication look, with modules based on cordiality, cheerfulness, creativity, confidence, all based on a syllabus of emotional competence? And suppose every child at school, every child had mandatory listening, questioning, and thinking modules to learn and practice every week from the age of 4, alongside its numbers and spellings and everything else that they learn. Suppose the GCSE was held as part of the secondary school entrance process. It would certainly help the child to build stronger communication and coping skills before making the important move from primary to secondary. Or maybe it could be taken in the early years at secondary school at age 12 or 13 as a curtain raiser to their general GCSEs. How would we feel as parents if our primary age kids were set family homeworks that had to be completed during the week involving parental input too, on subjects as essential as how do we as a family communicate under stress? How do we as a family give and receive feedback to one another? In what different ways do we ask each other questions? How self-aware of our behavior are we when things don't go our way? Just imagine the conversations that might take place at home then, as each family member is encouraged to recognize and reflect and take responsibility for their influence on domestic harmonies and tensions. How beneficial might it be to achieve this exam just before the chemical turbulence of adolescence throws everything out of kilter, and give the child a real baseline? I think some destructive teenage behaviors might be drastically altered if every child already had a hardwired, embedded default to respectful communication to fall back on during those challenging years. I don't know if any of you saw my blog that was recently published on the MOE Foundation website. It was called "Why Teen Brains Don't Behave as Adults Want Them to." I can put it in the put the link in the chat if you like. Maybe Jane, if you've got access to it, you could put it in there too. Now, there's no question of robbing the children of their childhood by using adult speak. In fact, I would subscribe to the exact opposite. They can still use the vocabulary of their age groups and their peer groups, but just by embedding an emotional literacy in young children that is perhaps as competent as we might expect from a grandparent who's somebody with a lot of experience in managing conversations, I think this would create a wonderful framework of confidence. We know that children crave boundaries, if for no other reason than that they have something to push against. And these are the kind of boundaries within which they could explore and experiment, achieve and fail in a non-judgmental, safe, mistake-allowing environment. I heard a shocking story actually on one of the very first coaching courses that I ran for MOE. And one of the participants was a 24-year-old former gang leader in South London. And at the end of the course, he shared some of his story and a takeaway about what the coaching course had given him. And I remember him saying that in the gangs, when there are disputes, there are always words before the knives come out. And he said, if we'd known about these kind of words, these coaching kinds of words a few years ago, he said, I wouldn't have had to go to so many funerals. He said, we just didn't have the right words to get ourselves out of difficult situations. Now, might it be possible for us all to grow up in a world with less judgment and blame and bullying and unwarranted insecurity? Is it really such a far-fetched idea? And I don't think it is. And I think it starts with more praise. Now, the third maxim I've got here is just about simple observation. And one of the greatest coaching phrases that a parent can employ is, I notice. And when we use the word notice, there's very little judgment wrapped up in the phrase. I notice that seems to be making you nervous. That will build better rapport than, why are you getting so nervous? I notice your brother's nose is bleeding, is perhaps a better way of recognizing it than, what did you do to your brother? Because when we analyze our children's behavior and activities, what we tend to be doing is looking for mistakes to correct. Try it at home tonight. Just notice things instead of judging them. We have to learn to take a step back sometime. We have to encourage and allow mistakes. Let's not rush to make the mistakes wrong, because some mistakes are magnificent. Who here has made a mistake? Several mistakes? The same mistake more than once? Because it was fun, right? Why wouldn't we want to enjoy that moment another time or another many times? And who learned from at least some of those mistakes? So if we accept that we cannot fully learn without making some mistakes, why are we encouraging our kids to make the least possible? There's only one way not to ever make a mistake, and that's to not try anything new. And that would be a shame. Let's look at this being right, being wrong again. Who really cares? I thought I'd do a little mental arithmetic test just to make sure you're still awake. So here's a teaser for you. I'd like you to do this in your head only, okay? No writing down. All up for this? So look, take the number 1000 and add 40. Add another 1000. Add 30. Add another 1000. Add 20. Add another 1000 and add 10. Who got 5,000? Let's have a look. Who got 4,100? But who really cares, right? We could always get it right the next time. Here's another one, look. It's from Professor Anders Ericsson's book, Non Campus Mentis. And it's a compilation of hilarious exam answers by students. The founder of the New Italy was an intelligent sardine from the north. Now, I'm sure that child, that student, knew what they meant to say. And there are dozens of these in his book. It's a fun read. But the point is, if they don't know things, kids will have a go. They'll get creative. And we shouldn't seek to squash that creativity by insisting on what is right and what's wrong. And we shouldn't seek to squash that ability to be carefree about the mistakes. I don't know if any of you saw that inspirational TED talk by the late Sir Ken Robinson, the wonderful educationalist, who told a story about a little girl drawing God. And when her mum said, "But sweetie, no one knows what God looks like," the little girl said, "Well, they will now." And his point is that creativity is as important as literacy or numeracy, or indeed being right or being wrong. Fantasy is just as inspirational as reality, and the two are not often so very far apart. Who are we to judge? If we choose to allow being wrong to become stigmatized, we as adults must take our share of the responsibility for creating an environment where mistakes are the worst thing a child can make. And if mistakes equal progress and learning, fun and laughter, as they do, why on earth would we want to stigmatize them? Mistakes are funny too. We shouldn't overlook the humor inherent in mistakes either. How are we judging these motorcyclists, for that matter? Are we outraged? Are we delighted? Is it right? Is it wrong? I'm saying, just could it be possible to scale down the judgment and the frustration or the irritations or the impatience within our own families when things go wrong, and just laugh at ourselves a little bit more? I would say those who never made any mistakes never really made anything. So look, I'm suggesting that we should be open with our children, totally open. It's a big one. Being open is a skill in itself. It needs practice and courage. Be bold, be generous, because we may need to expose ourselves first. And it's so liberating when we do. Our children are far, far wiser than we might expect them to be. Openness requires letting our children know that we fully believe in them and that we're not going to judge or steer or advise. So let's be fully open with our children about what we're intending when we start coaching them. Tell the children what we're trying to achieve and what we're intending to do. Coaching, as most of us know, is not some sort of head voodoo that's going to trick people or trap them into saying or doing something we want them to do. And on the contrary, we're encouraging them to do and say whatever makes sense to them at that moment. So let's tell them, let's be open, that we will not judge or criticize their thinking, and then make sure we don't, regardless of what they reveal. This is a skill that's hard to master for parents because we are so attached to our children. And of course we are. But there's a time when we can detach. And if it's really tricky ground, it's okay to ask them, could I just challenge you on that? Can I play devil's advocate? If they will allow us to. This approach, I think, gives a child tremendous feelings of self-worth and control over their thoughts and actions, and they will respond to it. If you can create this spirit of openness in your families, I'm certain that before long, you'll experience the joy of watching the brains of the youngsters in the family rewiring uninhibitedly as they embrace the brave new world of open family communications. A child that's well informed and well prepared for coaching is infinitely more coachable than one who isn't. And on the subject of encouraging openness, here's one of the most underestimated techniques I think a parent coach can learn. And we mentioned it earlier, and it's so important to respectful communication, and that's permission. Now, we all know what permission is, but do we use it? And do we use it to a powerful, useful effect? Nowadays, most of us would recognize the importance and respect involved in knocking on our children's bedroom door and waiting outside until we're invited to enter. And if we're not invited to enter, we don't go in. And we'd expect that of them too, into our private rooms. These are private spaces. Their own bedroom might be the only space, the only private space that children can find where they can gather their thoughts, explore their developing tastes, make sense of them, and be alone with them. If you invited me to come into your house for a cup of tea, you've given me permission to be there. But if, when you came back from the kitchen after putting the kettle on, you found I wasn't in the living room anymore, where I already had permission to be, but instead I decided to go into your bedroom and have a look around, how would you feel then? Or you found me looking in some cupboards where you kept some personal things. How would you feel then? But if, after having my cup of tea, I just made a bit of small talk and commented how nice your home was and noticed that you'd done some home improvements, I might then ask you if you wouldn't mind showing me some of the things you'd done to the property. And at this point, you might agree and show me around, or you might say, I'm sorry, the other rooms are a bit untidy right now and I hadn't anticipated visitors, but maybe we could do a little tour when I've tidied up another time. So there is a well-known tenet in coaching, many of us will have come across this, which is just never begin coaching someone without their permission. It's essential that we ask permission of our children before we enter a coaching conversation, and we mustn't insist that our children must share their thoughts with us if they don't feel ready to do so. I'm going to recommend we try not to operate under the guise of what I call stealth coaching, just squeezing in several coaching questions, hoping they fall under the radar, because we want to know about our children's accomplishments and ignoring whether they are in the right frame of mind to talk about them. And it's so important to children to feel they have that mantle of control. And when they do, they'll tell you just about anything. Permission is permission. And it's a discipline we spend a lot of time reinforcing and practicing in our coach training sessions. So look, we're nearly there. I've put here, every child deserves a thoroughly good listening to. And I often ask in a training, who's been told you're a good listener? Who's been told you're a terrible one, for that matter? And what does it really mean to be a great listener? And then we do some exercises around different levels of listening. We call it the 5 levels of listening, and several of you will be familiar with this. Attentive listening with our children requires that we no longer try to make sense of our children's situation by organizing their thoughts for them. Just remember, they'll shut down if we habitually do this. So attentive listening requires us to ask those powerful, encouraging 3 words, tell me more. And perhaps with permission too. Would you like to tell me more about that? And then persist when necessary with further neutral questions like, and what are your thoughts on that? What more do you know about that? And anything else? My own experience tells me it's beneficial to start off with questions around thinking and thoughts, i.e., what are your thoughts, rather than what do you feel about that? And the reason for that is that people's minds tend to stay in a more positive space when you approach their cognitive responses first, before you approach their emotional state. So inviting emotional responses can bring people towards a more negative space, which takes more energy to move away from. So attentive listening with these simple, almost bland questions, accompanied by neutral body language, don't react too much, don't be too movemental, not too many gestures, expressions of surprise or whatever, and accompanied by a lot of silences that invite the children to continue their thinking. And remember, we have to be open with them about this. We have to tell them why we are leaving silences, otherwise they become awkward. When this is all presented well, this will allow the child to really organize its own thinking. It allows it to reflect on what it knows, to confront, to organize their thinking, and ultimately to take ownership of it. I call attentive listening invisible listening, because you're not doing much. Nancy Klein calls it being a listening partner, because you're just there. So we're doing almost nothing, but by doing just enough, we're creating a space where the child can self-correct and self-regulate. So let's get out of the habit of trying to correct or advise and just butting in with yes, but, or don't you think you should, and questions like that. It's so destructive to the child's thinking. Again, this is a level of listening that many people feel uncomfortable using initially because their egos require that they be seen to be actually doing something. So doing almost nothing sounds like a confusing skill to learn, doesn't it? But then when we see the other person joining their own dots in their own ways and getting excited by it, it starts to make sense. And then level 5, active listening. For those of you who know exactly what goes into active listening, this expands on the attentive listening and is a more interactive form of exploration than attentive listening, but neither one is better nor more advanced. It's just simply more interactive, which is why I've put both of these at the same level on the slide. Parents and coaches often feel more comfortable listening actively, and it is a very big part of all coach training. And I'd encourage you all to read about it and or practice it daily until it too, like attentive listening, becomes an embedded skill. And in case you're wondering about the other 3, levels 1, 2, 3, I'm not implying that interrupting and hijacking other people's topics and talking about our own experiences or giving advice are bad listening. They all have their place in conversations, but they're simply not so useful when we have our coaching hats on and we're listening like a coach. Let's allow all children to become used to being heard. They may or may not ultimately get their way, but they will always know that they have a voice. And I put here about lazy parenting. If parents are not allowed to give helpful advice, what on earth can we give? Well, we give questions and we have to work on the quality of our questions, or they'll meet with short shrift from the kids. We must try not to ask judgmental questions or why questions or leading questions. In fact, I think it's chapter 31 or thereabouts in my book is very useful there. Have you ever noticed what we do when we're faced with a crisis in the family or a dilemma or just a problem? What we tend to do as adults is we immediately go to advice and we make immediate plans, spontaneous plans. But what impact is our spontaneous planning and often unsolicited advice having on our children? Well, funny you should ask. I think it's mostly manipulation. They feel manipulated. And it's mostly corruption. We're corrupting their ability to think. So our insistence on calling all the shots in the family might actually have been corrupting our children's abilities to create their own neural pathways that might otherwise be searching for new and innovative solutions that might be opening up brand new adventures for them. So suppose planning and advising didn't need to be our go-tos in running our families. Suppose the real key is to present ourselves as calm, flexible people with a sense of patience and humor, and to not have a plan and to not force it through. Have you ever thought that in business, for example, or indeed in government or in our families, if you know exactly how to get everyone to support all your ideas, one could argue that that's efficiency. Or one could argue it's controlling, it's corrupt, it's manipulative. So if we plan a lot and advise a lot can go wrong, and our mind is focused on just rejoining the plan. But if we plan a lot can still go wrong, but our minds have space to focus on opportunities showing up. I think when children know they will not be advised or talked over by an overzealous parent, and that they're trusted to think for themselves, they regularly produce the sort of wisdom and powerful lateral thinking of which every child is capable. So let's get back more or less to where we started, because our children are expecting us to expect them to excel. Let me finish tonight with some simple sequential questions that you might like to use when asking your children about their accomplishment. In fact, each one of these is a good quality standalone question too in its own right. They don't have to be sequential. On this slide here, I've put again, just allow the child to know. And then look at these questions. You'll notice that some of these look like feedback questions that we use sometimes in the coach training. Okay. And essentially, they're all exceedingly positive, very open, very supportive. And if you use them in more or less that order and really listen to the answers you'll get, you'll find a lot comes out from the child. We're not focusing on the mistake here. We're not giving our opinion or our advice. You may know Ken Blanchard's famous phrase from his book, The 1 Minute Manager. Anybody read that? Where he urges people to just catch people doing something right. How much richer would all our relationships be at home if we heeded that advice? Small minds find faults. Great minds find possibilities. Small minds judge. Great minds marvel. And I know which camp I want my kids to be in. So look, I'd like to thank you for listening, if indeed you have been to this talk. I don't know if you've come across my patented case principle for learning: copy and steal everything. So if anything you've taken away from this talk feels useful for you to try, please take it, please use it. It's yours. I didn't invent this stuff. I'm just disseminating it. I'm just putting it all together. So let's spread the word. No point keeping it to ourselves. And if you have any insights or takeaways from tonight's talk, please do just put them in the chat while they're fresh. I see there are some messages in the chat already. And everybody else can take a look at them. And indeed, any questions too that we can discuss in the Q&A coming up if you're able to stay. If you have any thoughts about the talk, please feel free to put them down on the form that I think Jane is going to put in the chat as well. And again, if anybody wants a copy of the book, please drop a line to Jane, and I'll be happy to write a quick message in it as well if you want to put a message with your email. So look, we've allowed around 45 minutes for questions and discussions, and I'll be happy to stick around. If you need to take off now, I'm going to say thank you so much for making the time tonight to really invest in growing our children into more cheerful, confident people. It's been a real pleasure being with you tonight. Thank you ever so much.